Man, this guy is a youth pastor at a massive church, multi-campus church.
And that word authority is not a popular word.
Right.
We don't see authority on social media. For a couple years, he graduated. And at that point, really felt like giving me and the church a middle finger.
Well, welcome to the Thematic Podcast. This is a new series called Conversations in Contrast, and my name is Craig. And today I have one of my good friends, Matt Harder, with me.
Come on.
And this happens to be the first episode that we're recording. So let me just explain Conversations in Contrast, what this comes from. We're here today to talk about two primary things. One, pain, and two, victory. One is something that you've been through that's hard, difficult, painful, dark night of the soul. And two is like, what's something healthy that you're doing? And so the reason for this is because there's so many good things to social media and always some intentionally or unintentionally bad things. And one of those bad things is that we're teaching a generation, to look at other people's lives and the filters and think that their life is somehow not as good as everybody else. And so everybody's putting their best foot forward, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but we're sort of showing everybody else that, oh, my life is perfect and yours isn't, because everybody knows their own life and their own pain and their own struggle. And so we wanted to hashtag fight the filters a little bit.
I love that.
And pull back the curtain on people's pain, because what I found is that successful people, leaders, influential people are typically not that way because their life is perfect or because they haven't been through hardship, but actually because they have.
Yeah.
And God's made them. There's a making of a man or a woman of God in the kingdom. So that's what Conversations in Contrast is all about. So we're going to start with you, Matt. And the way that I wanted and felt led to introduce somebody is because the honest truth is anybody that I'm going to interview has a huge bio probably that's notable and all kinds of things. What I wanted to do is introduce people based on, and I know you a little bit, full transparency, but based on what maybe the normal person would see or think of the person if they just sort of knew them from afar, maybe knew them online or they're in their church, something like that. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to introduce you that way.
Yeah, I love it.
So this is Matt, and if I were to try to figure out who Matt is, this is what I see of your life. I see, man, this guy is a youth pastor at a massive church, multi-campus church in the Seattle area, Renton, and all over. I see a guy that is full of joy, has a beautiful wife and kids. I see a guy that has leads this youth ministry, multi-campus youth ministry, and a youth and young, a regional, probably statewide conference that has, as I understand it, blown up to thousands of students. And I think I even saw yesterday that you guys are trying to fill a room of 5,000 this year, which is super exciting. Yeah. And I also know you as somebody that started an organization or co-started an organization called Lead Local that empowers pastors to be in relationship and sort of lead in their local area. And you guys travel around and do that. And you're a pastor, you speak places. And so these are all things that somebody just from afar would see and, man, I want to be like that guy one day. Man, what could I ever? How did he, Matt Harder. And so I don't know how much of that is accurate to the T or not, but in light of that, in light of this life that is clearly being used by God, clearly influential, and the world would say, man, significant in the kingdom, I want to ask you the first question on this podcast, which is, what's deeper in Matt's life that you've been through? What's one of the most painful or difficult things that you've been through that people might not know? And if there was sort of a making of Matt into the success that people see, what's maybe some of the darkness that people didn't see that God has used to form you, and how have you gotten through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love what you're doing here. It's so innovative, and just I hope I can say this, but we're like in your camper right now. And this, you wouldn't even tell. It's
Yeah.
like amazing what you've done with this, and just think it's cool that you're going down, traveling down, and
Yeah.
meeting different people. So it's just an honor to be here for your first one.
Thank
This is
you.
awesome.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I didn't
Maybe
even
I wasn't
note
supposed
that.
to do that.
No,
I
you
don't
were.
know.
I was
But
supposed to.
But yeah.
We're going Seattle to San Diego.
Yeah. Hey, no filters. We're staying
no
where we're at
filters,
right now.
We are inside of a 26-foot long trailer. My kids sleep right over there, and we sleep right over there. And so we set all this up in about 30 minutes. Well, today we set up in 30 minutes. We spent about 2 months building this out. But yes, we're traveling. This is called Shalom, the mobile podcast studio.
That's great. Yeah, no, and just so with your question, the call of God on my life, I was 14 years old, and I remember that missionary, at the altar say, hey, there's someone here that's called into full-time ministry. And at that point, and
what were you at? You a missionary? Were you in a church service?
No, I was in a church service in Moses Lake. It's where I'm from, Eastern Washington, a small little church.
I don't know if I remember that.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Moses Lake.
Okay.
I moved over here when I was 18.
Did we talk about that before?
I don't think we have.
What church are you from?
From Moses Lake Assembly of God was what it was called. I grew up Baptist, and then at 13, I needed a youth ministry, and my mom, she's Pentecostal, my dad's Baptist, so that she sees the opportunity to get me over to the AG church.
That's right.
So that's how I got there, and just was a part of youth ministry there. And I'm an introvert, so I remember when she called me up there, and I felt that call of God.
Oh, this missionary called you out.
Yeah,
not
called
just
me out.
Oh, somebody in the room.
No, she said, boom, right there, you're called in the full-time ministry. And I felt that before she had said that, so it was a confirmation. And I remember going up there, shaking. I was actually crying, and it was because I'm actually an introvert, so I wasn't because I was happy. It was because I was just so fearful with that.
To be up in front of everybody.
Yeah, from people. And at that point, I thought ministry was all about just getting up there and preaching.
Okay.
So now that I've been in it for a while, and that's what we think.
You pastors work 1 hour a week.
No, totally. And that's what you think when you see Instagram or
Right.
social media,
Right.
Talking about filters, is you think, oh, wow, all it is he travels and he preaches,
Right.
and that's all it is. And at 14 years old, that's what I thought it was. And really, it's probably only about 10% maybe of the job
Right.
is the preaching.
Right.
Obviously there's a percentage of studying and that kind of thing. But so with that comes really, well, what is the heart of ministry? And the heart of ministry obviously comes from your heart for God. It's where it starts, but really your heart for people. So I think the most difficult thing in ministry has been really managing the emotions that comes from pastoring people. Because, people hurt people. That's what we
Right.
do. I've hurt people. You've hurt people. We're hurt by people. And I don't think Bible college can train you for that.
Right.
I think it's really life's experiences. And so early on, being 22 and being at New Life Church now for, I think about 15, 16 years now, there's been that process.
Have you been working here that long?
Yeah. 15 years this year would be me on staff. Yeah.
Hang
I'm
on,
36.
brother. Oh, you're 36.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
So
you get that little boy face.
yeah. So, coming in.
What did you start? What was your role when you started?
Junior high ministry. So junior high director. I wasn't licensed, so they couldn't call me pastor.
Right.
And so.
But you moved here for a job.
No, I actually moved here at 18 to intern.
Okay.
So I was an intern for a couple years.
Okay.
And then that's when they had an opening for junior high director. And so I kind of said, hey, I'd love to see if I can do this. And that's how I got in there. And then eventually did high school as well.
Okay.
And that whole process. And so
let me go back just for a minute then.
Mm-hmm.
When you were just 14, so just a kid, you felt like God was saying, I'm calling you to ministry. That was already a seed in you.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the prophetic word from the missionary confirmed the seed.
Yes.
But but it wasn't, or maybe it was. At that time, was there, like you talked about the different things that you see in ministry, and at the time you thought it was just preaching.
Throwing great events.
Yeah.
Preaching.
Was it, that's what you just thought it was, or was it, oh, that's the thing that I want to do? Or was there a love in your heart at that point for people? Was there a shepherding? Do you understand the question?
No,
Was it just
totally.
like, oh, I think God's calling me to this? Or is it just like, no, I think God's calling me, but that's what I want specifically. And did God develop the shepherding nature, part of your heart later, or has that always been there?
Yeah, I thought that's what it was just from looking at my youth pastor. Kind of the centerfold of ministry that we're talking about. I didn't see my youth pastor having conversations with angry parents.
Right.
I didn't see the conversations he has amongst staff and that dynamic. So as a 14-year-old, at 12, I began to get that developed as hearing a missionary actually at the Baptist church. It was another missionary. And that is when I really began to get developed in me thinking, wow, this is so much more than just going to church on a Sunday. Man, people can give their whole entire lives to this.
Right.
So at that point at 12, I didn't really even think through what would that mean. It was at 14 at a different church, now at a Pentecostal one. God uses every denomination,
right.
as long as they're pointing to Jesus. That no, you're supposed to, it's confirmed you're supposed to do this your whole entire life. And so for me, it wasn't that I wanted to preach. I was fearful of that. I'm an introvert. Still to this day, I get anxious when I'm going and traveling and preaching, but it's part of the call of God on my life as a pastor and preacher. So I think it really did for me start with that burden for realizing that there's a heaven and there's a hell. And at that age, I didn't want my friends going to hell. So that whole shepherding was instilled in me, I think, at a younger age. And so that's where it kind of begins to get developed as you get into it.
Right.
And going, wow, okay, there's so much more to this dynamic. You're working for a lead pastor who has a vision. So how do you deal and work through that when maybe you want to do something different or you see the ministry going this way?
Right.
Angry parents, going to Bible college, they'll never teach you, conflict management. I think we should have a class on conflict management. I think we should have a class in colleges on business.
Yeah.
Some of those things with working on a budget. So for me, I think it was
There's an amazing book called What They Didn't Teach You in Seminary. Yeah. And it's like 17 chapters of things they didn't teach us in Bible college. Yeah. That are absolutely what you actually go through when you're a pastor. But so, okay, I'm a pastor as well, so I recognize the complexity of this question and honor, and so you may or may not be able to, and you may, without names, be able to take us a little deeper if you're willing. But so this starts to be developed in you at 14, the call, it's starting to work out, you do an internship, they bring you on staff, you've been now at this church here 15, 16 years, and friends, if you don't understand the power of what that means in a culture today where pastors burn out, pastors move on, pastors get beat up, the longevity of that is significant. And so obviously that's somebody that's not just in it for the stage or for the notoriety, you're in it shepherding people. So your heart's developing in this way. Obviously you love God and you love people. So can you take us deeper into maybe an instance or multiple, because I know as a pastor there's multiple, but like a little bit more the way that you have felt pain from the people that you've tried to love. Yeah. Whether it's a parent or a student or it's just somebody in the church, like, is that okay to ask? I don't, probably sure, obviously you wouldn't use any names, but we always want to protect people and honor people, but if you can elaborate for you, what's just like taking you to your core and made you cry, like, man, that cut me deep in the ministry?
Well, for instance, I could go student, parent, pastors, but just for one story, there was a student that, I would see him at least, every other day for about 2 years straight. And you're pouring into them, you're pastoring them, their deepest and darkest struggles. And so for this kid, he had a struggle around sexuality. And so working with him, and we actually even got him some great help, resourced him. And then after a couple years, he graduated. And at that point, really felt like giving me and the church a middle finger. If I'm just being real honest, just by kind of, hey, I'm going now to this next better church, so I can begin to get trained and that kind of thing. And went to jump around and started bouncing around a little bit. And so there's expectations that I think he had and that people have over what it is to you pastor me. And either if the expectations aren't met, or they are met and now they're done with you, that feels a lot like you're being used. Right. And so with him, not only was he going to different, churches, that kind of, which is fine, and how you deal with that as a younger pastor, but it ended up coming out, this is crazy, and I don't know how much I maybe should share, but he ended up getting into the business of sex slavery, not himself, but actually pimping out girls. Wow. And so for 2 years straight, dealing with that sexual identity issues that he had, now he's in jail. And I went to his court date, saw the whole sentencing and all that. So again, I don't know how, I mean, this is just
That's
real.
that's gonna be all public
and
knowledge.
raw. Yeah.
Wow.
And so to get texts, I got over 40 texts because I started just counting like, wow, these are a lot of texts after I'd read what was happening of this, sending me in the news. And here's this young man who for a couple years, almost every day, at least every day on a call or a text with him.
Wow. So you were intentionally discipling this guy.
Oh, yeah. And so what does that make you feel like as a pastor when, oh, wow, is something wrong with me? Like this kid was the closest to me that anyone else had been for 2 years straight. So I think...
So can you take us into that, if you're willing?
Yeah.
Your heart and your mind in that moment, in those few weeks, let's say, what were you saying to yourself? Were you dealing with it healthy? Or did you, in that time, looking back, say, man, I was a wreck, or I wasn't thinking right, or like, did you ask yourself, am I a good pastor, or what's wrong with me?
Oh, yeah. No, I think every emotion you can think of or thought would pass your mind. Like, am I a good pastor? Could I have done more? Is something wrong with me that I couldn't disciple someone for 2 years, and then they're dealing with this extreme? I mean, that's extreme.
Right.
So you're really starting to kind of second guess your calling. So no, I think those emotions were there and they were heavy and processing. I think the hardest thing about it where brought me down to the pits is now giving that to now the next student, giving my time, my intentionality,
right,
the discipleship. Because now when you see somebody that has some of the same characteristics, it's very easy as a pastor now to put them in that box.
Right.
And I think that Indy gets cynical, critical, judgmental. So I think the darkness wasn't maybe so much my emotions, it's where those emotions were leading me to,
right,
of being now a surface pastor. Hey, you'll get it next time, but not actually doing the work it takes to still make the phone calls, to still text, to give another different kid, different story, another chance.
Okay, I want to talk about, because what you're hitting on is huge. I want to talk about that. I want to come back to that though, if I can. When you said, just because I'm curious, when you said the guy kind of gave you guys the middle finger and moved on, just curious, was that just in the sense of how it felt, the middle finger, because he was just moving on to the next thing that suited him, or was there actual attacks on you? Like, because sometimes people can move on because it's like, oh man, this church is great, or they're being drawn to something, but sometimes on the way out the door, or they're leaving something because they're mad or whatever, but sometimes on the way out the door, they actually turn around and offer a figurative middle finger, like an attack, not just, oh yeah, I'm feeling led over here, and then they politely exit stage left. Was there not physically, but yeah, physically or with his speech, was there anything like an attack on you, and this is why I'm going because you didn't da 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 da?
Yeah. It's funny because it wasn't probably the exact words. It was how do I say this? It wasn't maybe the words that he said that was the attack. It was that, hey, you're not giving me enough opportunity here.
I see.
And so I'm going to go somewhere else because they're going to let me preach.
Oh,
and so I think that knowing then the person's story, that feels like a middle finger because, man, 2 years, you should trust me to know that you're not ready yet to do that. And so then there's all different emotions with that. When someone leaves and you go, man, we've had so many conversations. I think you feel like, man, why couldn't you trust me in that? It wasn't so much, I mean, yeah, like you're saying, people go to churches all the time and people come to our church from other churches all the time. So that's not where the sting comes in. I think just knowing, man, all this time I poured into you, man, hey, did you hear anything that I said? All the help we got you. And to just kind of write it off and to go do your own thing because we're not, that expectation, we're not meeting your expectations. Therefore, we're not going to come under your authority. And that word authority is not a popular word.
Right.
We don't see authority on social media.
No, we don't.
Right. And so that's another thing I think with this generation that's can be difficult is you want it now, you want it quick. Well, that pastor's doing that. And you have no idea the personal struggles, the personal life, the persistence, the perseverance that it takes to be a pastor. And so I think that's probably why it stung so much. It's not going to a different church. I mean, the churches that he went to were great friends of mine. So I think where it stings is that, man, when you're when you're done being discipled, then see you later.
Right.
And there's times where people need to go to the next thing because maybe there's an intern program that's better than where we were at that point for those different things.
Right.
But knowing his story, and it was so personal, because that's where the pain comes in. It doesn't come because someone leaves your church.
Right.
But if you really know them and you've poured time into them, and it's okay to go to that college or go to a new state, but without that blessing, it can be really difficult as a pastor. Then, man, could I at least give you my blessing for that?
Right.
And if I don't, can we still work through a couple more things?
Yeah, that's it. Because 2 years of relationship and pouring into somebody, but he didn't trust the process of the outcome.
Yeah.
And then he moves on, and you're like, man, I would have at least just liked to be a part of that because I've only done this last 2 years because I love you.
Yeah.
And so involving me in the process of the decision. And okay, so now let's loop back to what you started to talk about, because this is huge. I think whether you're a pastor or not, people start optimistic about things in life and the way things are going to go. And then in the context of relationship and love, there's always the greatest opportunity for pain and hurt, because that's what love is. And then when we experience it, either for the first time or a few times over, maybe it's just in a breakup in a relationship, maybe it's, with a boss, or for us in ministry, you're pointing to somebody, you've opened your heart to them to serve them, and now they hurt you. And now is like this moment where most people probably don't actually think it through. I'm going to become cold and cynical now.
Yeah.
But like there's a subconscious moment where your soul is deciding, I don't know if I'm going to open my heart to that anymore. And so I think you use the term like you could just become surface level pastor. And so was there a time that you found yourself doing that, or did you just feel the temptation to do that? And what was the process of like deciding, I'm not going to let myself just live in cynicism or surface, like I'm going to intentionally put myself back in a position where I could be hurt again? Because pain and love have to go hand in hand. Like if you don't put yourself in a position where you could be hurt, you're probably not really putting yourself in a position where you really love fully. Yeah. So what did that look like for you? And maybe you're still working through it, but was there an intentional moment where you're like, I'm not going to hold back my love and my leadership to protect myself from pain? Or how did that go?
Yeah, well, I married up, so my wife is really good about letting me pout for 24 hours.
Okay.
And then like, hey, you know what? If you need to pout, you need to cry, you need to be mad, you need to be cynical. Do it for 24 hours. And then
is this a real conversation?
This is real conversation.
This is what she says to you.
This is what she says. So maybe it's not a wife or the person watching this. Maybe it's a best friend, someone they trust, a mentor. But to have someone be able to get in your face in some of life's most difficult moments, that's the first step. And at least with my experience, that helps me get through that is, you know what, this is real. It's real pain. But you got 24 hours to process this. And then let's continue to process it, obviously.
Yeah.
But you got to get back up. So I think having that voice in your not just in your mind for your self-talk, but actually have someone that you trust, that loves you, that's walking with you, that's been through some stuff with you, that's been through their own stuff, and be able to say, hey, okay, it's now time. You've said what you need to say. You're frustrated. You're mad. But now you got a call. I mean, you got that call that's bigger than people, really, is God's call first. And his call, trusting him that he has it all together, is the beginning. Before you love people, you got to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and let him love you through that stuff as well. So I think that's another thing is God called me long before any of these hurts or pains happened to full-time ministry. So to know that do you trust the story? Do you trust God's story in people's lives and in your lives? You know, Paul the Apostle says, I plant the seed, Apollos waters it, but God makes it grow.
Right.
So I think being able to process some of this, because that's not the first painful story. There's many of that happens. Not that extreme. I just shared with you the most extreme thing that's happened. But to be able to, do you really trust God's call in your life? Do you trust that he called you out, and not one person can stop that? And then not take it so personal, because God cares more about that person than I do. Right. And so not to do like this, over spiritualize it, but you really have to do you really trust God in all this whole process, that he'll walk people through it if they're now saying, I don't need you anymore? Well, I'm not God, he is. So having someone in your life that can be straight up with you, really trusting God's story in your own life and that person's life, and then just being real with my own humanity and knowing that I haven't always done it right with people.
Right.
And just knowing people are in that process. And then sometimes it's not personal. It's because they just need a fresh start. They need a fresh season. Maybe a student broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and now they need to be out of our youth ministry, even though we poured so much time and energy into them. Or maybe I'm not God. Maybe we've given them everything that we can give them.
Right.
So that's fine too. That's not a bash or a hatred towards us. It's, I'm only have so many gifts, and maybe I've helped somebody along a season. Well, that's great. At the end of the day, as pastors, we have to realize there's also seasons and people come and go, and it's not always, hatred or they're mad at you or you did something.
Of course.
So I think just being real with that reality, and then even in this own story, just knowing that God cares about this young man more than I do.
Right.
And so he'll deal with the process of whatever that looks like for him.
Yeah. Cool. Well, maybe as we conclude this portion of the show, what is maybe, if you could think of a couple, 1, 2, 3 practical things that somebody can do to intentionally position themselves where they can come out of something like this healthy? Because like we said, this is not just something that a pastor faces when somebody leaves the church. These feelings and the potential outcome of becoming hardened, cynical, and all that happen all the time, especially in dating and marriage relationships. And with friendships, man, I that was my best friend, and they stabbed me in the back, and now nobody's getting close to me. I mean, I just heard a podcast the other day where these pretty big, well-known guys, they're like, nope, I don't let anybody in. I got 4 friends, and that's it. Nobody gets in. Nobody gets in. And I'm like, what a way to live.
Yeah, it doesn't seem missional,
Well, I don't think these guys were Christians, but like, you know what I mean? Like this is, but that's the way that the world's thinking is like, I'm not going to put myself in a position where somebody can steal from me, hurt me. It's the opposite of the way that Jesus has called us to live as a sacrificial servant of humanity. But, so I think I heard at least one practical thing. You said you have somebody, in this case, your wife, that was a part of the process of, okay, be whatever for 24 hours. And then after the sun goes down, now you know the call, get back up and go. So is there anything else you could share with somebody that just, man, this is a particular brand of pain that they're feeling or have been through, and they're looking to come out the other end healthy? Is there any practical things that you can do to position yourself for the healer to heal?
Yeah, that's good. Well, not only getting an inside voice, so someone who's super close with you, but also an outside voice that's not so in it. And so for me, that's a counselor. I think it's really important to get a counselor. I see my counselor once a month. Okay. And I see him so I don't just go to him when there's a problem. It's kind of like that check engine light before the car runs out or before you need to fill it with gas. You're filling it with gas consistently before it happens. So now, I'm in a point in a rhythm where I'll do it at once a month. Okay. And that is a way so that I don't have to go when there's a huge problem, but there's a consistency. And it's amazing when you come out of someone who's not even in any of it. Right. They're able to just step back and give you that godly perspective. Yeah. And you're like, okay, this is not as big of a deal. It's a big deal right now, and you got to be real with those emotions. But as time goes on, that perseverance that we have been put inside of us, you're going to look back at it and it won't sting as much. It may always sting. I mean, some people deal with some really heavy trauma. Right. So it's not to downplay that, but I think as time goes on, you're able to look back at it. And if you do handle it well, which is having other people's perspectives and you're processing those real emotions and communicating what you're feeling, you're able to look back and actually grow from that and learn from it. So now from some of these really hard moments, when those moments come, okay, it's a teachable moment for me. Okay, what am I going to learn in this moment? Versus letting this make me cynical, critical, joyless. I'm going to find joy in this because I know coming out of this, I'm going to be a better person from this. Right. I can't dictate how people react in life and towards me, but I can dictate how I respond to that. And I think allowing that process to happen, and how am I going to respond to this, and how will you let people close to you again, You realize that people are going to hurt you. So you're not putting a wall up, but you got that thick skin and a soft heart. So I think that's a huge deal as to whatever that means for people. How do you have thick skin, but you still carry that soft heart? You got to find outlets for yourself to go on a walk. You know, I have my mornings where, it's pretty much every morning. When I miss a morning, I can feel it for that day. But to be able to get up, his mercies are new every morning.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, okay, you got something new for me today. So what happened yesterday that now I can prepare today to learn from and to set my course right for today? Because all you can worry about is today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to worry about itself. So even in the pain, the dysfunction with working with people, you got to have those moments that are fill up moments for you, because people will take and they'll take and they'll take, and we take and take and take. And so at the end of the day, to have an inside voice, an outside voice, and the moments where you can get away and fill up with whatever that looks like.
Wow, that's such a perfect transition to our last portion of the show that you didn't even know. I would imagine you don't know that we're doing, but I love how that tied in, and you'll see how in a second. So Conversations in Contrast is, what's one of the hardest things that you've been through in your life, and how did you get through it? How did God get you through it? And the second is, let's talk about something awesome, healthy, selfless that you do. Now, I don't know if you knew this or not, but the way that I've been trying to do this is I want to talk to some people behind your back that know you. And I say, hey, if there's something that you know about Matt that he does, or the way that he is, that he probably wouldn't talk about from stage or on social media because it would definitely sound like bragging, but you know he does it, will you tell me that? And so I got some insight from a friend and your wife, and one particular thing stood out to me. And I'm going to frame it like this because it was so interesting. She told me a few things about you, and it's your spouse, you know, hey, what do you just love about him? And she talked a little bit about who you are, your ministry, what you've done, and you guys have taken a youth conference from like 100 to 3,000. Looks like maybe this year you're aiming for even more, and just awesome things that people look at and they're like, man, I want to be like that. I wish I could ever do that. But she said one thing that stood out to me the most. She said, you wake up every single morning and you drive in your car from 5 to 6 a.m. and you pray and meet with God.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, every morning? And she said, yeah. And I said, man, growing the conference to 3,000 is amazing, and I'd love to talk about that. But the reality is that probably happens because of this, as well as probably most other health in your life. And so that's why you were just saying, man, inside voice, outside voice, and fill up time with the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you ever talk about that from stage or people know that about you, but I know that about you now, and it's out of the closet. So if I can say it like this, we know now, can you for 10 minutes or however many minutes not be humble? That's freaking awesome. Will you just tell us about that? Why did that start? How did that start? And what's it accomplished in your life?
Yeah, well, it's hard to be humble about it because I need it, because I am a weak human being.
Right.
And I'm a human. So that's why I need it so much. And when I was 23, I was losing tons of sleep. I was not taking care of myself.
Okay.
I was building a ministry, and I was the least joyless person around. I was angry. I was getting cynical. I was getting critical because those relationships that I didn't realize. I thought once you in the church isn't going to hurt you. We're all Christians.
Right.
Like there's forgiveness, there's love, there's all this. And so 23, only being in it for a year and a half maybe at that point, and getting just, feeling like beat down. I was in a place, just an unhealthy place. And I remember just praying out to God that night. I mean, it was in 1 a.m. Lord, I need you to start getting me up early in the morning. Like I was sleeping in till, at that point, I guess sleeping 8:39, which isn't for some people. But for me as a pastor, that was go. I was a full-time student, full-time minister, had 2 other jobs, and I was burning out, and I'm not going to make it. At that point, there's no way. And at that point, I was ready to pack my bags up, go back to Moses Lake, and go do what my dad did and just go work. And, that's it. And I just remember praying, God, if I'm called to this, then I know my first thing is I'm called to you. And I don't have the disciplines that I need. in order to keep sustaining this, the disciplines to be with you, to draw near to you, so you'll draw near to me. And that next morning, I mean, it was up till 1. I woke up at 4:30. I think it was around, it was 4:30. Didn't set an alarm, because before I would have to set an alarm.
Really?
So I've only got probably about 3 hours of sleep.
And you had just prayed,
I woke up,
Lord, I need you to wake me up.
That morning, I need you to wake me up. I need that. And I didn't even set an alarm, or I had set one for later that day, but I had woken up and I was refreshed. And from that day forward, 23 to now 36, I probably have missed maybe 10 days, 15 days, maybe max. So when I say
max,
now in my marriage, I've probably missed it maybe like 4 times or 5 more, just with kids and all that happens. And that's where you can feel it. I can feel it when I don't have that moment. So that's the stuff you don't.
So what time do you wake up in the morning?
I wake up at 5 a.m. Usually it's between 4:30 and 5:15, 5:30, because I don't set an alarm. So it's my body clock now. I think is so.
You don't
just
set an
used
alarm.
to it. I have not set an alarm since that moment. So when I have to fly out early in the morning to go speak for stuff, I'm up, because usually I'll fly out at maybe 7 a.m. or 8, and I'm way up before that. I'm up before my kids get up. I can't imagine being a dad in full-time ministry like this and what we're doing if I didn't have that 2 or 3 hours before. And that's what people don't understand, is you want the stage, or you want the preaching, or you want to build ministries. But if you're not allowing God to build your life in those early mornings, or maybe for some people they're night people, so they just need that moment, then you won't do it. You won't make it.
No, you won't.
You won't. And no one ever just tells people that, but you will not make it if you don't have those moments with God, and you don't take those moments to a serious depth. And because those are the moments he tells me, text that person and tell them you're sorry. There's friends that will get an early morning text from me, and hey, I'm praying for you.
That's Matt and his time.
Yeah, that's my time.
So do you actually drive around?
Yeah, so I'll drive. Now that gas prices are through the roof, I'm like walking sometimes. Sometimes I'll drive, but I could be walking for an hour and then start coming back. Or
so is it usually prayer and just listening to God, talking to God, and then Bible reading? Do you listen to the Bible while you're driving? Like, what's it all look like? Yeah,
it's interesting, because like when you're dating your wife, if it was so rigid, then you wouldn't enjoy the relationship.
Right.
So I do, for me anyways, I find it difficult when people are like, hey, you do this, read your Bible, pray, that kind of stuff. Yeah, those components happen, but I'm not so consumed and concerned if they even get done. There's days I don't read my Bible.
Right.
Because I'm spending more time in prayer.
But you spend an hour praying,
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, or there's days I'm just reading the Bible, or there's days I'm reading this great book that is filling me up, that is helping my walk with Jesus. And I just, I got into that, and it's already been an hour and a half or an hour. I got to, now start preparing for the day.
Right.
And so, yes, there's Bible component, there's prayer, but at the end of the day, I'm with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And it's his time.
It's one of the reasons why we cover our tables in Scripture, to remind us, especially on dining tables, that man does not live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. In other words, like if we're feeding our life with all kinds of other stuff to sustain us, but we're not eating from God and his word and his heart and prayer and worship, we're not going to make it.
No, we have nothing to give.
This is the process that I see a lot of times from people that they get into ministry, feel the call of God. It's like they meet God in a real way, and they're surprised by love, and they're surprised by this relationship. And it has nothing to do with like, I'm going to do this and this and this. Like when you first meet God, you meet God and you realize this is about relationship, not religion. And your life has changed.
Yep.
I get to know you, God, and then you start getting to know him. And then because you know this God and you love him, and it's just relationship, you're like, man, I want to share this relationship with other people. And that's where ministry starts. You start doing things in the world that helps other people know this relationship that you know and love. So then you go further down the line in ministry, helping people know the relationship that you know and love, but then you just start doing more and more and more. And sometimes if you're not really careful, you start doing so much ministry for God that you leave your relationship with God a little bit in the past.
Yep.
And
you get good at it too. So I can write a message quicker now, and is more faster than I ever have. You can get really good at what you do. And that's where, when you meet certain maybe pastors, you're like, man, they just seem So service, because when you're with the Lord, he's giving you a fresh word every single morning.
Right.
So when I'm preaching, I could write something and it sound great, but why is it impactful? Because some of that stuff, without me trying, came from a quiet time. I'm not in my quiet time to write a message.
Right.
I'm in a quiet time for the Lord to speak to me. And yeah, it probably will come out in certain messages,
Right.
and that kind of thing.
Right.
Because we get better at it. We know what today is what, and when I do what, and I can be really great at that. And you can get leadership and learn and grow in your leadership, so you can learn how to build conferences and what that takes.
Right.
If you have that persistence, anybody can do what they set their minds to, but few can make it the long term because they're not setting their hearts to it.
Right.
So that you can set your mind to it, but how do you set your heart to it? You allow God to set your heart.
Right.
So, not to cut you off.
No. It's just amazing. Yeah, the long term and the anointing, the actual oil on a thing. Because gifts and callings, those are irrevocable, but things like character, relationship, time with the Lord, anointing is, people can fake it, and you can be an eloquent speaker and say something, but it doesn't have oil on it. And so, man, that is convicting and beautiful. What a healthy thing that you do. And again, I would argue that the things that people see, the big conference, successful youth ministry, lead local, your relationship with your wife and kids, like all of it, that some surface level person in your life be like, wow, look at him. What they don't see is probably the key to all of it, which is your time with the Lord daily.
They don't see the struggle in the mornings at times when I'm upset about something, or I'm weeping just by myself, just crying.
Right.
Because life can get hard.
Right.
But then the Lord and the Holy Spirit picks you back up and goes, I've given you another day. Go out there. Do it.
Man. Well, beautiful.
Yeah, dude, this has been great.
Thank
you for having me.
Contrast. So,
yeah.
Do you have any last things that you want to share, maybe just to encourage anybody that resonates with anything that you've talked about today? And if not, at least would you maybe just close us in a prayer?
And I'd just say enjoy the process, because all the young leaders out there, you've got your dreams, visions that God's given you, but it is a process, and it always will be.
Right.
So if you don't enjoy that, you're going to get too far ahead of yourself. So enjoy all those little lessons that are difficult ones.
Right.
So, but yeah, let me pray.
Yeah, let's do it.
Lord, I just thank you so much for Pastor Craig and Jessica, and just their heart for you and their family, for God packing a trailer up and doing something bold, which is just to give you their whole entire lives, and to come down and to interview different people and pastors. And I just pray blessing over them, over this podcast, Lord, over the people that they meet. Lord, I just pray for increase, Lord, increase in every area of their lives as they give this to you. And I do pray for those who are watching right now. And Lord, I just pray that this conversation would not be disheartening, but Lord, it would be encouraging. Right. Lord, even in the conversation of getting up every morning, for some people, it would be hard to get up every morning, and they may not be able to. But Lord, I pray that it would be encouraging for them to start somewhere with you, to take a step, Lord, to make it about you, because when we make it all about you, everything begins to click in place. And even in the chaos, and even in the waves of life, Lord, we know that you're the God of the waves, you're the God of the chaos. And Lord, I pray that we would trust you, that you are making a straight path for us in all these different moments that are difficult to get through, that we would persevere and we'd keep our eyes on you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Pastor Matt Harder.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us, everybody, on Conversations in Contrast, and we'll see you next time.